Good morning and welcome to the third quarterly UL Michigan WLI Build Up networking series. We are so thrilled to have you all here with us today. We are currently doing the third of 4 quarterly breakfasts, so save the date for December 7th. This group has been meeting for the past almost 4 years now on a quarterly basis. To really build up and build teams of women that can complete projects together and really just create a support and networking system of knowledge. So I am so thrilled to have all of you here with us today, everybody joining. We have an excellent discussion prepared for you. But before we get started, I wanted to thank all of our team captains that have been working on getting all of the programming scheduled for all of the quarterly breakfasts. I want to thank the outgoing Women's Leadership Initiative chairs who really started this Build Up initiative, Stacy Esbrook and Shannon Morgan. I want to take a moment to welcome our new Women's Leadership Initiative co-chairs, Dina Fox and Kathleen Duffy. If you have not met them yet, I invite you to chat with them in the breakout rooms after our discussion. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank our sponsors, Enterprise Community Partners, and Lynchpin Legal. We do have Lisa Burden here from Lynchpin Legal today to share with you a few words about her organization.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Burden, the founder of Lynchpin Legal, and we're proud to sponsor these quarterly Build Up breakfasts. Lynchpin Legal specializes in nonprofit and business contracts. So I read all the boring stuff nobody wants to, and I love it. And strategic advising. My particular specialty is the commercial real estate, and in particular, complex tax credit financing transactions. And our job is to help you understand the contract obligations that you're entering into and negotiate the best deal that we can for you, which all depends on leverage. But from company formation to growth to succession planning, Lynchpin Legal helps keep your business moving. So thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, before we get started, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. If you are not participating on the discussion, the panel discussion today, I'm going to ask everybody to place themselves on mute and to turn off their video until we open it up for the Q&A portion of today's discussion. Additionally, if you have any questions throughout the discussion, I invite you to just type them into the chat so that we've got them ready. And then we will either call on you to unmute yourself to reiterate that question during Q&A, or I can just read that question aloud for you. Just let me know which one is your preference. Okay, here today we have 4 incredible women who are working on programs that are broadening BIPOC development opportunities. We have Tiffany Durr, the Senior Director for Fund Investments at LISC, Melinda Clemens, Vice President of Enterprise Community Partners, Elizabeth Luther, the Detroit Program Director for Capital Impact Partners, and Michelle Wildman, who is the Senior Vice President at the MEDC. Welcome, ladies. I'd like to take a moment to have each of you spend 2 or 3 minutes just introducing yourself and sort of your program of work to our audience today. We'll start with you, Tiffany.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for having me as a panelist on this series. So my name is Tiffany Durr, as Shannon mentioned. I'm here with LISC. Within LISC, I work in the strategic investments group where we manage all of LISC off-balance sheet funds. So we have a number of different investment funds. Some are national funds, some are local funds that we partner with our local offices, and we deploy funds through there. And we are responsible for raising capital as well as originating and managing that capital. So the fund that I'll speak about specifically is the Detroit Housing for the Future Fund. We work closely with our local office that's been there since 1990. They've done tremendous work in the community. We have a on the ground presence that spearheaded the leadership under Tahira Ziegler, who's now, her title has changed. She's the executive director of the Midwest Program VP. And we have 3 other folks that support our Detroit Housing for the Future Fund. This is a partnership that was created in conjunction with the City of Detroit Housing and Revitalization Department, as well as MISHDA. It's affordable housing focused, and there's a specific component in there to provide access to grants for minority developers, and the grants are used for pre-development expenses. The fund provides low-cost, long-term debt, either senior or subordinate, as well as preferred equity. So happy to talk to you about what Strategic Investments does broadly, as well as with our Detroit Housing for the Future Fund.
Thanks so much. Michelle, would you like to join us next?
Sure, yeah. I'm Michelle Wildman. I am the Senior Vice President for Community Development at the MEDC. Community development's work focuses on all of the place-based investments that encompass critical parts of the state's economic development strategy, programs that invest in real estate projects, create housing, offer an array of technical assistance tools to everyone from small business to communities to development teams. We also do a lot of work in historic preservation. The SHPO, one of the more recent additions to our community development family at the MEDC. Also happy to be here and talk to you about some of the work that we've done over the past couple of years around cultivating programs for emerging development teams that really play a critical piece in trying to bring more BIPOC development teams and really create more diversity in geography and underdeveloped places in Michigan. Thanks for the invite.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michelle. Elizabeth?
Sure, thanks, Shannon. Nice to see everyone here or see all the familiar names and some familiar faces. So thank you for having me this morning. So I'm Elizabeth Luther with Capital Impact Partners. Capital Impact is a national mission-driven lender, a community development financial institution in good company here. I'm letting my corporate background do a little bit of the work for me. So Capital Impact recently formed a partnership or alliance or merger, one of those 3 things, depending on what resonates with you, with CDC Small Business Finance, the nation's largest nonprofit SBA lender. So our organization is growing and changing as we add new capabilities to our work here in Detroit and elsewhere around the country. I have a place-focused role, so I oversee Capital Impact's programmatic work, really our capacity building work here in Detroit, where our focus is on supporting residents throughout the city through mixed income neighborhood development that increases density, provides high quality housing across the income spectrum, and returns vacant properties to productive use. In that role, I oversee our equitable development initiative locally, which is training, technical assistance, and capital solutions program for real estate developers of color. That program originated in Detroit, and we have since expanded it nationally. So I also do some work supporting the scaling and replication of that effort nationally in other markets. Local highlights, just to give a little bit more of an overview of Capital Impact's work in Detroit. It's actually the organization's 10-year anniversary in Detroit this year. So we've deployed over $300 million in the city to multifamily mixed use development projects, educational facilities, and healthcare facilities here in Detroit. With the Equitable Development Initiative program, which I'm happy to talk more about, we've led 4 training cohorts with 86 program alumni, leveraged over 50 partnerships with other CDFIs, community-based organizations, and private partners. I know many of you have been involved in that program to do that work. And this year we've really focused on, this year and last year, building out more capital products to support the developers in that program. And then I already mentioned the merger with CDC Small Business Finance. And so, if it makes sense to talk about anything small business related, I'm happy to talk more about that. But again, thanks for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Elizabeth, and congrats on that 10-year milestone. Melinda, you are up next.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I am Melinda Clemens, and I am the Vice President and Market Leader of the Detroit Office of Enterprise Community Partners, and most recently also now over Chicago office as well. Enterprise Community Partners, we're an affordable housing organization fundamentally. And so we take capital, various forms of capital and grants, as well as policy and programmatic work to really advance affordable housing, understanding that's the bedrock of any economic mobility play. You have to have a place to sleep at night. Well, there's more that's needed than just a place to sleep at night. And so that's where we do our programmatic work and our policy work. And so to date, we've invested about $500 million in the city, in the Tri-County area of Detroit, and we've done over $1 billion in the Chicago area. And so excited to be here. Racial equity is what the Detroit office was built upon. And I'm currently working on a national program called the Equitable Path Forward, which is a $350 million BIPOC program for developers. So excited to tell you more about that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Melinda. And congrats on taking on Chicago as well. I hope that's a congratulations.
Maybe. We'll see at the end of the year.
Awesome. Well, this first question I want to kind of direct to all of you because all of your programs are somewhat in different levels or different stages. Some of them a little bit newer, some of them a little bit more established, but all of them have been sort of created to address some sort of gap that you saw in the market. And so I want you to ask if you could talk to me a little bit about how your organization went about identifying what that gap was and how your particular organization was suited to sort of cultivate a response to that gap. Elizabeth, your program's about 4 years old and sort of growing nationally. So I think I'll start with you.
Sure, happy to jump in. Thanks. So, and maybe my response to I've got a nice discrete answer to this question, given that the Equitable Development Initiative did start in Detroit, and a lot of the credit goes to Melinda Clemens, who was at Capital Impact at the time and was our market lead loan officer in the market, underwriting deals, identifying projects to support an effort called the Woodward Corridor Initiative, which is kind of a broader quality of life improvement effort in Detroit's Midtown area. Through that work, we identified kind of an imbalance in where our loans were going to in terms of kind of the makeup, racial and ethnic makeup of the development firms. We were happy with the community level outcomes of the investments we were making in Detroit, high quality mixed income housing, vacant properties being rehabbed, et cetera. But we're not working with borrowers that were reflective of the city of Detroit's demographics. So we wanted to do something to try to address that disparity, and that is where the Equitable Development Initiative in Detroit really came out of. In terms of identifying market gaps. You know, originally our thought was that we would focus our efforts on really stewarding a few developers who wanted to work with us, along with technical assistance, support in the form of kind of whatever support was needed, owner's rep, potentially, or other mentorship and guidance, and then capital tools to align with those needs. There was a lot of interest as we were kind of doing interviews and designing the program in a program like this. And so we expanded the focus to be a cohort-based program, kind of cast a wider net to allow us to work with a larger number of developers at any given time. And through that effort, we were able to learn about individuals' needs in the market. And then develop capital tools to meet those needs after working with a larger group of borrowers. In Detroit, you know, there are a number of different types of support with aligned goals, support for community-based organizations led by women and minorities, development firms, and et cetera. So there's a need to coordinate across all those areas, and there's like plenty of room for all the resources to be providing support in Detroit. But yeah, that's really the origin story. In different markets, our program does look different. So in Washington, D.C., our focus is really on affordable housing preservation, which aligns with capital impacts lending in Washington, D.C., and some of the needs in that market. A lot of emerging developers are looking for pre-development and acquisition capital to be able to compete with development firms that have access to a larger pool of funding for those activities. So what the program looks like doesn't necessarily look exactly the same in every given market, but the focus is on supporting aspiring and emerging real estate developers of color through those focuses of training, technical assistance, and capital solutions.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Melinda, I'm going to pass it to you next because I think your experience sort of kicking that off at Capital Impact, I'm sure sort of influenced the way that you thought about how you were going to kick off something at Enterprise.
Thank you, Shannon. And just to say that Elizabeth is being very humble. I did not create that program on my own. She has taken the program and really expanded it nationally. So I'm excited about that. So how we identify gaps in the market is we heard from our stakeholders, right? That they are not getting access to the capital that they needed. Additionally, we've also heard from, the media and the press, right? We hear about it from the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times. This is a national problem as far as developers of color being able to access technical assistance as well as capital. And then I would say our third source is our think tanks, right? So we read the Pew reports, we work with the Brookings Institute. And so from those three sources, we really were able to identify the deep need. We knew there was a need, but really to quantify what that need looks like has been one of the things that led to this program being created.
And let me follow that up, Melinda, with how does then your organization, how did you identify where specifically Enterprise could sort of fill those gaps?
As far as geographically or as far as the structure?
I think structurally.
Okay, structure. So we knew we wanted to raise enough funding to be able to support 100 BIPOC developers with funding of not only investing in their projects. So this is what's really different about Equitable Path Forward. Up until this point in my career, I have primarily invested in real estate projects. What's so great about Equitable Path Forward is we took a step back and we actually are investing in the entity. And so our capital is unsecured lines of credit that borrowers can use to strengthen their entity. So they may need it for staff, they may need it for pre-development. And we often overlook the entity level and pretty much focus on what the cash flow is going to be from our projects that we finance. But we also know that our developers are out here really scraping to get by and can use something that can help them get over that hump. And so that's how come we came up with the capital. And then technical assistance we know is needed because there aren't a lot of organizations that we work with that are BIPOC and have inherited real estate companies, or someone in their family has been able to teach them about real estate. So that's the second piece for the technical assistance. We knew it had to go with capital. But what's exciting too is that we also created a leadership component of it. And so we're working with Howard University, where we can do a training program where students get out of school, they're able to work at different departments within enterprise. So it could be in the markets, it might be in finance, very similar to what banks used to do with credit training programs. And we want to do that. I thought that was really important because if anyone has tried to hire someone of color in this region to do this work, you know that there is a very big shortfall of candidates who typically apply for these positions. So we really wanted to open up this industry to other folks around the country.
Shannon, may I jump in just to build off Melinda's comments? Okay, I didn't want to jump the gun here. I think what Melinda was sharing is so critical, and it really points out to the need for each of our organizations to really tackle the broader issues in the industry, not just affordable housing and technical assistance. We all have a role, and depending on your source of capital and your constraints, that can really dictate your flexibility. And listening to Melinda talk about entity level unsecured financing, that's exciting, but that's not what every source of capital has a risk appetite for. And I think about our fund where we are focused on real estate. It's all real estate secured, whether it's, most of what we're doing is debt. There is some equity that we are providing through our fund, but we are taking that long-term, low-cost approach to preserving affordable housing. So in conjunction with the city and MISTA, the goal is 10,000 to 12,000 units of preserved or created units across the city. So it's really, really exciting to hear how we're all taking a different approach. I did also want to add that what Melinda touched on about researching the need and how that need is always evolving. And we need to keep our ears to the ground. There's another effort, not only our Detroit Housing for the Future Fund, which is a local effort in Detroit, we have a national effort called the Black Economic Development Fund, which is a $250 million fund that was launched at the end of last year in the wake of the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And it's a short-term debt fund for Black developers. So we're trying to understand how we can use short-term debt and use it strategically with these borrowers across the nation. It's not geographically restricted, and pair that potentially with other sources of capital. But we're listening to see, what do our investors need to hear from developers? Is this the right place to play? Where does each fund, each organization, where can we make the most impact? And it may not be in that unsecured place, which would be great, but there is a need potentially on the real estate secured front in the funds that we're managing.
I can jump in here if that's okay. I want to echo something that Tiffany said about sort of keeping our ear to the ground. For us, those conversations and partnerships has really been critical to kind of developing our understanding of the approach that might be necessary to accomplish this at the state level. While we've been focused on creating economic opportunities for every resident in the state, from Black Americans and minority communities to geographically disadvantaged areas, we know that that doesn't look the same in all parts of the state. We're really fortunate in some markets to have these programs in place and cohorts that are providing that technical support and programming, but we know that that doesn't exist, in every market. And so those sort of listening sessions have really been important for us in developing kind of a multi-pronged strategy that included, beefing up outreach efforts, looking at the tools that we already have and creating opportunities for emerging developers, just, given the value that we recognized, and, wanting to create opportunities for people to do work within their own communities, as well as the creation of stepping stone programs that we hope to launch this coming fiscal year. We heard sort of that the equity and lack of capital are real barriers to entry, and sometimes, we're regularly doing loans, but sometimes we know they just need grants, and so we've really been fortunate, though, to have really great engagement, not only with our municipal partners throughout the state, but also who have been working on this themselves, but also to be able to kind of pick the brains of some of those development teams who, maybe not so long ago were emerging themselves and can really kind of lend us the value of their lessons learned, and, maybe making the road a little smoother going forward.
That's great. I'm actually going to start sort of with you, Michelle, because I think what you mentioned is, sort of going back and creating some stepping stones. And I'd like to sort of have all of you think about the ways that your programs can sort of work in tandem with each other to sort of build a stronger pipeline. And so has the MEDC thought about, how you guys don't necessarily have to create your own stepping stone programs. How can you leverage these programs that others are working on and exist to create a stronger sort of pipeline and infrastructure?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And sort of when I say stepping stone programs, I'm really referring to, grant incentives, right? That where we want to have broadened flexibility that may not be part of, a particular statute that governs an existing program. The legislative path is one, of course, but sometimes there's a shorter, easier way to do it by rolling out a new program that, allows for greater grant flexibility. But it is absolutely essential that there are other supports that come along the way. We're looking at people with limited real estate experience, maybe have done some single family residential, for example, but not the commercial mixed use that is the space we generally operate in. And so we definitely are not looking to reinvent the wheel here when we know that there are partners in the state who really provide that great technical support and can provide that opportunity for mentorship that's necessary to ensure success.
Thank you. Tiffany, I'm going to pass it to you. When people are coming to sort of try and access the strategic housing fund, where are they sort of typically coming to you from, and at what point in sort of that, let's call it the pipeline, are they sort of trying to access that as a resource?
Sure. No, I think it's pretty interesting. We have a few ways that folks are coming to us, but to your original question, I think that these kind of conversations that you're hosting, where we all come together, we're all playing in the same space, right? So there's a lot of overlap, and there's depending on what we're targeting, but there's programs out there. And so the more that people know, the more they can figure out, does this fit me? Is this the right program for me? Is this the right sourcing for me? Is this the right market? We all have different ways that we're approaching. So this knowledge sharing and just getting the word out of what we're doing locally is key to building this pipeline. Folks are coming to the Detroit Housing for the Future Fund through the website. We have some roadshows that we do. It's kind of these one-on-one conversations with up and coming developers. Most of the developers, I would say more than half are newer developers, emerging developers. We do have a developer of color program, a grant program where we provide pre-development funding. So that's been really crucial in targeting that audience. And so we have a few different ways that we're out and about. LISC has been in the Detroit market for 30 years, so we have some deep relationships there. But also this is a little different than what LISC has been doing typically, since some of the projects are what we call NOAAs, the naturally occurring affordable housing, or housing that's market rate, or housing that's coming out of compliance for their LIHTC, out of their LIHTC compliance period. So we're targeting different folks than we may have worked with previously. So that involves a little bit of outreach as well as marketing. To shift gears to our national fund for the Black Economic Development Fund. Again, some developers are new and emerging, but because of the structure of our debt, it's 5-year, it's term debt, it has to be secured. Some of those borrowers are more, kind of middle market developers. And so we're listening and we're trying to figure out where we can have the most impact while meeting the needs of our investors. So while we would like to go and really provide that strategic capital to emerging developers, it just may not be the case with that fund. And some unless they're partnering, or it's a really it's a low risk deal, I'll just put it that way, then it fits with our national fund. Detroit Housing for the Future, though, we've seen a lot of emerging developers because that's the mandate, that because we're working with affordable housing and we have the grant capital in there to support a higher risk appetite in that fund. It's exciting what we can do.
Awesome. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Melinda. I'm curious to, given that you've, sort of had experience in 2 different programs, wondering, how you've sort of built out or are building out the enterprise program to make sure that it's sort of building upon and working in tandem with what other programs sort of exist.
Yeah, that's a good question. So our program is focused on developers who are already developing. They have experience versus, and we did that specifically because, like in the Detroit market, for example, Capital Impact already has a program for emerging developers, right? And so we didn't want to create something that's already created. And LISC also has products that they work with emerging developers. And so we wanted to create something that was different, than what was already offered, because the need is so great. All of us could put all of our money into the markets around the countries and it still wouldn't be enough. And so I tried to create a program that was beneficial and that could complement the programs that were already out there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can I jump in on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was writing down some bullet points as everyone else was talking. And my first one was, there's no shortage of need for capital. So Melinda, I think you covered that one. Often 3 out of the 4 organizations represented on this panel are in the same capital stack in any given deal in Detroit. So we're always collaborating with these different types of products and funds that we have, different levels of risk appetite or just different areas of expertise where we can bring a different thing to the table at the project level. And I think, the more of that, the better. And other CDFIs and more traditional lenders are doing that as well in Detroit. So that's, a clear way to partner, and we can learn from each other's products. Just this past summer, we rolled out just a small grant pool to cover pre-development costs for some of our Equitable Development Initiative alumni in Detroit. And as part of the design and vetting process, I think we scheduled conversations with representatives of every organization here as well, just to determine the information about specific projects and how we could be additive, make sure we were being additive and collaborative. In Michigan, I would say, for training and technical assistance, there really are a wealth of resources. We have CEDM has a real estate boot camp that they just revamped. That is a really great program that focuses on affordable housing development. I think the registration is opening soon if you're interested. Building community value, their Better Buildings, Better Blocks program is a program that runs twice a year, a 6-week effort that focuses on neighborhood development in Detroit that has really grown over the past 5 or 6 years. They have, alumni size in the hundreds of developers focused on Detroit neighborhoods. And then READ, the Real Estate Association of Developers, is a membership association of developers of color that formed actually after the first iteration of Capital Impact's Equitable Development Initiative to provide kind of an ongoing space of support, network building, and I think now they're segueing more into kind of like systems level policy advocacy for developers of color. So it's great to see that organization really growing and expanding what it's trying to do. There's lots of resources and there's a need for more. And I guess the other piece that I wanted to note, the other piece is just like relationships. How can we partner? It's staying in touch, like Tiffany mentioned. It's panels like these. I think that was you, Tiffany. And then it's like regular engagement and building trust across organizations and relationships, so we can be reactive and additive in real time. Right now, our team is going through a process of determining what our program should look like in Detroit in 2022 as we have grown this pool of alumni, many of whom are working on projects, some of which are working with us as a lender, some of which aren't. How can we develop more tools to be able to support our alumni, also provide ongoing training that continues to be additive to these other items that are in the market? And how do we stay up on what else is coming through the pipeline as our partners are also working in this space? So that really just does require like ongoing one-on-one conversations, discussions like these, bringing people together and building good relationships so that we can all do more where our missions align.
And I just want to add too that all of us have worked together before. So we all reach out to each other. I know that was a question, how do we collaborate together? We all work together, particularly on project level finance. And so as we all know, you need multiple sources of capital in order to be able to complete a project, particularly here in Michigan. And so we all reach out to each other if there's a project and with the lending team to say, hey, can you fill a gap? Can we work together on this project? Additionally, when we have any kind of programmatic work or we have anything that needs to be judged or there's some kind of competition, we always reach out to each other too to participate. So it's really more collaboration than competition just because the need is so great and we do work together pretty regularly. Particularly also want to just give a shout out to Stacy who was on the line. She works with LISC pretty closely with the Preservation Partnership from the City of Detroit and the Housing Fund. And so even though we both are kind of affordable housing providers, we still need each other to play the roles that we need to cover because the need, again, is so great.
Agree. If I can just reinforce that, I've done work at the local level and at the state level, and for example, LISC was in almost every transaction that I would see, just really critical local partner in bringing that capacity where it wouldn't have otherwise existed. And similarly, some of my other colleagues on the panel are in almost every capital stack that I see, in the role at the MEDC. So this is certainly not something that can be done together. And I think to really kind of make a dent in this need. We're going to continue to have to, challenge each other and be creative and, and how we bring some of the tools and resources to bear here.
That's great, Michelle. I actually wanted to sort of ask something to add on to that. Elizabeth has mentioned, all of you actually have mentioned, that the access to capital is, a huge issue. What are some of the existing barriers that exist from being able to provide that access to capital? Do your organizations all have different restrictions? I know Tiffany, mentioned that there were some in terms of the long-term and short-term debt that they're able to provide.
They're probably, I'll take a first. They're probably very similar, right? And so most of us who work at CDFIs have grown up in banking. And a lot of the criteria, I think, stems from banks. So for example, we have loan to value limits. We have debt service coverage limits. We have a limit where we won't even talk to you unless you've done a real estate project before and you've done it successfully and you've done it on budget. Well, who has completed a project on time and on budget here, right? That is a huge obstacle. And so trying to relax some of those guidelines from want to have to need to have is what's going to really help us with BIPOC developers, right? We typically require BIPOC developers to have $1 million of cash on their balance sheet. That wipes out every personal friend I know, right? So, really changing the way that we think about BIPOC development and developers and how we evaluate them is how we're going to be able to change the system.
Anyone want to add to that?
I wouldn't mind adding to it. And I think, and Melinda's right on point. I'm reformed banker. So enjoy joining LISC. And I mean, and that's the basis for lending. And it's the credit lens that we've all grown accustomed to, whether it's right or wrong. And one of the conversations that I was involved in a week or two ago was about gatekeeping, and to what extent is our organization and our products opening gates or are keeping up the gate? Like, are we reinforcing the gate or are we opening up the gate? And that's a really tough question. And it put a lot of us on notice and holding us accountable in our leadership positions about the degree to which we're taking responsibility for recognizing where we are gatekeeping in our communities. So, the thing I wanted to add to that is that even if we have great metrics, a strong loan to value, strong debt cover, we happen to cobble together $1 million in net worth and liquidity, then these deals are tough. And, I think it was Michelle who said we're all involved in these capital stacks together, and that's just the debt component. If you add in the equity components and any other source that you're bridging, these can be pretty complicated deals. So that technical assistance component is crucial. So, just understanding that, the technical expertise to not only understand these deals, how they work, and how every stakeholder throughout the capital stack is impacted by the deal. That's something that I think is a crucial piece. There's some players that are excellent, developers that are excellent in understanding that and communicating, but not very, very few and far between. And then we're all stepping in, not only as lenders and then closing calls, we're providing that technical expertise, and we're probably doing a therapy session afterwards. So it's very, very strenuous, and I think these deals are tough. So I just wanted to touch on that note.
Anyone want to add to that, or should we move on to the next question? Okay. So there's a question from Kathleen that is, what are the top things that municipalities should be doing to make your jobs easier? So coming at it from a little bit different of a role and asking what the public sector and the government's role is or should be in empowering BIPOC developers.
I will take a shot at that. I my technical assistants colleagues on my team might kick me under the table if I didn't put in a plug for some of the work that they do around becoming redevelopment ready. You know, municipalities looking at how they look at their processes, add that transparency, considering things that developers have to sort of hurdles that they have to jump or hoops that they have to go through around the sort of planning and zoning process that's a part of every real estate process. So I think there's work that can be done there, and we have folks who will sort of help guide municipalities through that process. Beyond that, I would sort of put a different spin on it. I think I would challenge, I come from a community where I think often the sentiment is that people are tired of having things done to them. And so sometimes, what's the old adage, like to be an expert, you have to be from out of town or something. And I don't think that's the case. I think that particularly in our large cities, we have some really great homegrown opportunities here. And I think whether that's the small business owner that never saw that themselves as a developer, to the entrepreneur who is looking to really make a community impact, I think I would challenge communities to kind of look within their own borders, so to speak, to see where that talent might exist and what supports they might be able to bring to add that local development capacity. I know I talk to an awful lot of folks who feel like they're constantly trying to, you know, kind of attract that development capacity to do these difficult to develop sites. And I think that we all can work together to do more on that, to, you know, make awareness around the tools that exist that can really help those folks be successful.
And I would just add, so the government assists us in a number of ways. So first, we get assistance from HUD. LIST gets it, as well as Habitat for Humanity. We get a pool of funds each year to give out as grants to nonprofit affordable housing developers. So that certainly helps. Increasing that allocation obviously lets us touch more people. I would also say that that's on the federal level. On the state level, I think governments can help as far as the QAP. And so we make comments every 2 years on the QAP. We did something really interesting in Chicago. They have their own QAP, and we actually did a racial equity impact assessment of their QAP. And as a result, now they're able to have more developers of color who are applying for funding for that allocation because they call that out specifically. That's tremendous. And then I would say on the local level, the city of Detroit, by providing home funds as well as block grants, are certainly helpful. Looking at the underwriting and the capital structure of those grants and those programs, by being flexible, it allows us to work with a larger pool of individuals.
Yeah, I don't have anything to say that's not, I'm trying to not repeat, so I'll just like say ditto to everything that has been said. I think increasing transparency, particularly around how decisions are made at the municipal level, it benefits everyone, right? That's kind of you know, if you have an application process for a funding source, that makes the process transparent, scoring criteria, that makes that transparent for everyone. So it's an equitable approach across the board. I mean, looking inward, CDFIs and banks can do more of that too, honestly. Streamlining permitting and approval processes, I think, is huge. You know, land banking is a great capacity, and being really thoughtful about how banked land can support local ownership. And then, you know, this is a little more of well, I think this probably applies anywhere. Really, this is really tough, but I'll throw it out there. I mean, working to tailor tools that are available to support smaller projects. A lot of the developers that we're working with in Detroit, and really just the built environment in Detroit, there's a need for, you know, rehabbing of 2-story commercial structures with one commercial bay and 1 or 2 residential units on top. And that's tough, a tough project size for a lot of lenders. And then it's also a tough project size to be able to use some of the subsidy tools that Melinda mentioned, like CDBG and home, et cetera. So I think that's another area to think about.
Anything to add, Tiffany?
I'm going to go with Elizabeth's ditto on everything. And these are the local experts. Since I'm more on the national level, I'm just enjoying listening to a closer nuance on what's going on. So I'll reserve that.
Yeah, great. Dominique, I'm going to ask you to come off of mute, if you would, to reiterate your question. I think people have started to sort of answer it in the last sort of conversation, but I don't want to sort of mince your words for you.
Perfect. Okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. I'm actually sitting in my truck in my garage, so good. So greetings, everyone from Tennessee. I'm Dominique Anderson, Affordable Housing Coalition, Tennessee Affordable Housing Coalition Executive Director, as well as a consultant in this space. So my question was, I'm working and having conversations right now on a very grassroots level around like restorative justice and empowering communities to take control in their own spaces. The capital that you all provide, I understand emerging developer programs and built one in Nashville and am part of one in Memphis, so I get it and I love them. I wanted to know if you have someone that's not necessarily a, MBA or super graduate, what capital, what opportunities are available for those neighbors to take control of their spaces at a grassroots level, their community, and purchase property and do some development projects? There's a lot. There's a lot in there, but is anybody grasping that?
Melinda, you can go ahead and
You go ahead, and then I'll just ditto.
Okay.
If we do a lot of the same things.
It's great. Well, Dominique, thank you so much for the question. Thank you for joining us. It's exciting to hear about what we're doing. So I'm checking. So you mentioned Tennessee, right?
Yes. I work across the state as the ED, but I live between Memphis and Nashville at all times. Yeah.
So I'd love to connect you with our local LISC office there for state and local specific funding sources, but I'll speak to a national perspective with the fund that I was mentioning earlier, the Black Economic Development Fund. Hopefully our information is shared after this, and I can speak to you about that type of fund. The caveat that I was mentioning earlier is that this fund, based on how it's structured, isn't the type of fund where it goes pretty far down the risk spectrum. It's not for kind of evergreen funding, or it's not for unsecured lending. So we'd have to really understand what your project looks like and to see if there's potential for a short-term debt source that can be utilized for what you're trying to achieve. So I'll leave it at that.
Perfect, thank you. And I know Kathy Cowan, so it lives in Memphis.
Well, you already know. You already know.
Thank you.
No problem. Oh, and also another thing to consider if it's a LIHTC project is NEF, a subsidiary of LISC that provides, it's a syndicator of tax credits, has an emerging minority developers fund. If any of those projects may qualify for that fund as well.
Perfect, thank you.
And I don't know that I can add anything, just being from Michigan and don't know the Tennessee landscape. I don't know that I can add anything super substantive on the sort of resource side. But what I can say is the folks that decade in state government, and the folks that I've seen kind of break out and, go from emerging to successfully champion and bring to fruition projects in their own neighborhoods, have all shared a couple of key attributes, one of them being just pure tenacity, right? Because this is tough. And we all have spoke about the hurdles and the things that we're trying to break through on ease to entry. But they've also kind of asked not been afraid to ask the question and to seek advice and, find those folks who may have experience in what they're trying to do. And often I've witnessed it firsthand, the kind of partnerships that have been cultivated and the people who can really kind of help guide along that path. So I would just say whoever those folks are in Tennessee, and LISC is excellent at helping to make those local connections, in my experience. So I think that kind of like having somebody who's going to walk beside you and tell you how to not repeat maybe some of the mistakes that they made are really important in bringing those projects, getting those projects off the ground.
Perfect, thank you.
The one other item to mention, which I think probably overlaps a bit with Michelle, your suggestion, and I don't know the landscape in Tennessee at all, but I think for more emerging developers without a lot of experience, an option of course is partnering with a more experienced developer and a nonprofit developer in particular. So like locally, some of this local CDFIs have development arms and are willing to partner with an emerging developer if the project has a mission alignment, et cetera. And I see that as a really huge, there's probably a need for more of that in our market, but it can be a great benefit to both entities if that's available.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap it up with one sort of final question, and this kind of goes along with the question that Dina posed in the chat. And so that is, what does success look like for each of your organizations? And the question that Dina posed in the chat was, how are we evaluating that success? Are each of your programs just sort of collecting that data individually, or is there some way that we can aggregate? So does somebody want to volunteer to go first with what their vision of success looks like?
I can start.
Great.
I think my vision of success is we don't need these type of programs, right? That's success. We don't have to have something specifically made for BIPOC individuals, that they actually can access the same resources that others in this country can access. If we're talking about just the equitable path forward, success to me looks like, we've helped over 100 developers, and we finance, enough developers where we create, 15,000 units of affordable housing. If we do that, that would be success for us. And how we're evaluating it is we have a research team internally at Enterprise. And so each year they evaluate where our developers began and where they end. And so over time, we'll have a 5-year trend line to show the actual impact we made at the entity level as well as at the project level.
That's really interesting, Melinda. I'm glad that's to me more intriguing to see the evolution of the developer, right? To see how your capital's truly making a difference. I mean, the typical measurements, dollars invested, number of grants, number of developers of color financed, how much affordability, units preserved. I mean, it only paints a partial picture. It's the most easily quantifiable. It's what investors look for. But the true story, before I was going to jump the gun, I said, man, picture of success is that we have a whole different conversation next year. And that, that we're talking about, moving emerging developers into a different level, or providing more innovative ways to bring capital, or innovate, we're kind of elevating the conversation. But in the meantime, those types of metrics, as kind of stagnant as they may be, they're helpful in demonstrating that there's a need for the capital and that it's deployable. But what's more intriguing is capturing the much harder impact metrics, which is the growth of the developers, the growth and impact in the community. Those are things that our organizations have to put resources behind in order to track that data. And it's something that has to be told easily. We've been doing a lot of storytelling, but that's difficult. You know, it's you know, you have to have a level of understanding of how complex these deals are and where we fit, and appreciate kind of what this fund can do. I'm talking specifically to the Detroit Fund, but that doesn't always translate to a sound bite or a snippet that can be sold to the broader investor market.
The only items I'll add, yeah, I'm not sure at the local systems level if we all have shared success measures. And it's an interesting question. Maybe some of our funders could aggregate our data and tell us. That's kind of tongue in cheek here. But for capital impact across our programs nationally, for the Equitable Development Initiative, we have success measures that are uniform at the individual geography level, and then at the enterprise level related to satisfaction with, program participant satisfaction, the percentage of our alumni who are leading projects that meet a certain set of criteria, the percentage of our alumni who are receiving financing from us and from other lenders. Some of this stuff we're better at tracking than others. We're developing new systems to be tracking more of that. And part of the challenge is, we have these long-term goals, right? The program, our efforts to support real estate developers of color are focused on long-term wealth building, neighborhood stabilization, and then increasing knowledge and connections within the real estate development industry. So that third one is the easiest to measure by a long shot. The first two, they take time and they are tougher to measure and require, ongoing relationships, some storytelling, and just thinking about metrics that can be uniform that do ultimately kind of roll up to those broader goals. So I think the more we can talk about our shared goals and learn from each other, the better.
Awesome. Thanks, Elizabeth. Melissa, sorry, Michelle, what does
Yeah.
success look
So, beyond just wanting to say ditto to everything that Melinda said, I add a state government lens. Every single day our work across state government has the potential to create opportunity for prosperity and wealth that can have a multi-generational impact. And so, I think for us, success looks like all the things that these ladies have talked about, but also really kind of continuing to break down those barriers where they exist, because all of this stuff is related to each other. We're talking about wealth building opportunities, and so that means better access at the local level and increased wages and more economic opportunity. And so continued work around those partnerships and breaking down those barriers when they exist, whether they be legislative or within our own programs, it is going to be important to have continued success in this area.
Thank you so much, ladies.